I don't really know where to start, so I'll start with the ending. I never should have gone back to that building. But if I don't tell you from the beginning, you won't understand why I went back, or why any of this matters. So I'll try to keep this organized, even though I know that by the time I get to the end, my hands will probably be shaking too much to type straight. This happened 3 years ago, when I still lived in a mid-sized city in the Midwest and worked nights at a call center. I was 24, didn't have much money, and needed a cheap place to live on my own for the first time. I found a listing for an old building downtown, one of those pre-war walk-ups with a cage elevator and narrow hallways that smelled like old floor wax. The rent was absurdly low for the area. That alone should have made me suspicious. But I was 24 and didn't have much money, like I said. The building manager, an older guy in his 70s named Harold, showed me the apartment. Unit 404, 4th floor. It was small but clean, with a view of brick wall from the side street. He walked me through it quickly, pointing out the radiator, the water pressure, the fire escape, all the practical things a landlord tells you so you stop asking questions. I signed the lease that same week, mostly because I didn't want to keep sleeping on my cousin's couch, and partly because the building had a kind of tired, old-fashioned charm that made it feel more like a home than the newer apartments I'd looked at, the ones that all smelled like fresh paint and felt like nobody had ever really lived in them. The first strange thing I noticed came only after I'd already moved in. The unit next to mine, 403, always had its door shut, but every so often I'd hear the sound of an old radio playing low through the wall. Not music, just static, or maybe a distant announcer's voice, so faint I could never be sure I was actually hearing it, or if my brain was just filling in the silence. I asked Harold if anyone lived there. "No, that one's been empty for years," he said, not quite looking at me. "How come?" He shrugged. "Old building. Some things aren't worth explaining." I laughed, because it sounded like a line from a bad horror movie, and I didn't think much of it. I figured it was radio bleed from another unit, sound traveling through the vents, the kind of thing old buildings just do. The first few weeks were normal. I worked 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., so my whole schedule was already flipped, sleeping through the morning, waking up in the late afternoon. That meant I was awake the entire night before heading out to work, and that's when I started noticing the pattern. Every night, around 3 a.m., I'd hear footsteps in the hallway. That wasn't strange by itself. Buildings have people on odd schedules. I was proof of that myself. What was strange is that the footsteps always stopped right outside 403's door and stayed there. I could hear, through the thin wall, someone standing right by the lock, breathing. Sometimes for 2 minutes, sometimes for 20. By the third week, I decided to check the peephole the next time I heard the footsteps. I saw a silhouette standing with its back to 403's door, facing that empty apartment like it was waiting for someone to open up. I couldn't make out a face, just the back of a long dark coat, out of season. It was the middle of summer. The silhouette stood there for almost 10 minutes. Then, without knocking, without trying the handle, it just walked away down the hall, slow, and disappeared around the corner by the elevator. I should have told the building manager the next day. I didn't. I told myself it was just some insomniac neighbor waiting for someone, nothing worth mentioning. The brain is good at that, convincing you the strange thing is normal when you're tired and alone and don't want to deal with the alternative. For a while, that was the whole extent of it. Footsteps, a pause outside a door, a silhouette in a coat that didn't belong to the season. I started treating it almost like a piece of building trivia, something I'd mentioned to friends as a funny, mildly creepy detail about where I lived. I even joked about it once with a co-worker at the call center during a slow shift, saying my building had its own ghost story. She laughed and told me I should charge admission. I laughed too. It felt harmless then, like the beginning of a story you tell at parties, not the beginning of something that would follow me for years. Things escalated the way bad things usually do, not all at once, but in small increments you only piece together later, looking back. A week after the silhouette in the hallway, I started noticing a smell coming through the wall that separated my room from 403. It wasn't mold, wasn't gas, wasn't anything I could name right away. It was sweet and heavy, like rotting flowers or candle wax that had been melting for a very long time. It got stronger at night, especially around 3 a.m., the same time as the footsteps. I started avoiding sleeping with my back to that wall. It sounds silly written out like this, but at the time it made perfect sense to me. Turning my back to that wall felt, I don't know how to put it exactly, like an invitation. Around this time I also noticed something odd about the 4th floor mailboxes downstairs. There were 6 units on my floor, but only 5 names on the mailboxes. The 6th slot, which should have belonged to 403, had no name card at all. Just a blank rectangle of yellowed paper behind the little glass window, like someone had removed the label a long time ago and never replaced it. I asked Harold about it once, in passing, and he told me units that had been vacant a long time just had their labels pulled for cleanliness, which struck me as a strange thing to say about a mailbox nobody used. That's when I started making small talk with other tenants, trying to learn more about 403 without sounding crazy. Most of them didn't know anything, or pretended not to. A guy on the 3rd floor told me he'd heard something about a fire, maybe, though he admitted he wasn't sure and might be thinking of a different building entirely. Another tenant, a young couple who'd only lived there a year, said they avoided the 4th floor altogether when visiting friends because the hallway felt wrong, though neither of them could explain what that meant exactly. But an older woman on the 2nd floor, Mrs. Whitfield, who'd lived there for over 30 years, invited me for coffee one afternoon and after some hedging said this: "You're the new one in 404, right? Right next to the young woman's room." "What young woman?" She looked at me in a way I wouldn't fully understand the weight of until later. "The one who used to live there, before they closed it up. This was a long time ago, before you were even born. She worked nights too, if I remember right, at some hotel downtown. Kept to herself. One day she just stopped going out. Nobody noticed for a while, because she was already quiet, didn't have many visitors. When the manager back then went to check on her, after the mail piled up too long, he found the apartment locked up from the inside, chains on the door and everything, and she was in there, dead for days already. They said it was her heart. I never quite believed that." "Why not?" Mrs. Whitfield stirred her coffee slowly before answering. "Because the chains were on the inside, sweetheart. She'd locked herself in and locked something out, if you ask me." And before that, tenants used to say she was always complaining about footsteps stopping outside her door at night. Always the same time, like clockwork. Everyone figured it was some feud with a neighbor, some man who wouldn't leave her alone. After she died, nobody wanted to rent 403 again. Harold tried a couple of times over the years, new tenants moving in all excited about the low rent, same as you probably were. But they always left fast, no notice, didn't even ask for their deposit back. One fella left half his things behind, like he couldn't wait to be out of there. After a while, Harold just stopped trying to rent it at all. Cheaper to leave it empty than to keep dealing with the turnover, I suppose. Did anyone ever find out who the man was? The one she was supposedly having trouble with? Mrs. Whitfield shook her head. No one ever came forward. No boyfriend, no ex-husband, nobody the police could point to. It just stopped being talked about after a while. That's how it goes in a building like this. People move in, people move out, and the walls just keep whatever they've seen to themselves. I stayed quiet for a while after that. I didn't know if I believed it, but I couldn't dismiss it either. The coincidence of the footsteps stopping exactly at 3, the way I'd been hearing them, was too specific to ignore. For the next several nights, I tried to talk myself out of thinking about it. I turned on music before bed, loud enough to cover the static from next door. I asked my sister, who lived 2 states away, to stay on the phone with me sometimes while I fell asleep, though I never told her why, just said I was having trouble sleeping. She probably thought I was going through something. In a way, I guess I was, but the footsteps didn't stop. If anything, they became more regular, more deliberate, like whatever was pacing that hallway had settled into a routine it had no intention of breaking. And one night, listening through the wall with the lights off, I realized the footsteps weren't just stopping outside 403 anymore. Some nights, they stopped outside my door instead. That night, before heading to work, I decided to do something I now know was a mistake. I pressed my ear against the wall separating my room from 403, just to see if I could hear anything past the usual radio static. What I heard was my own breathing, echoed back to me a second late from the other side of the wall. Inhale, pause, exhale, and an almost perfect echo, a moment later, coming from inside 403. I pulled away from the wall fast, tripped over the bed, and stood in the middle of the room for what felt like a long time, just listening to my own heartbeat. The radio static kept playing low on the other side, normal, like always. Maybe it was just some strange acoustic quirk of the old building I'd never noticed before. I wanted very badly to believe that. I didn't go to work that night. I called in saying I felt sick, which wasn't exactly a lie. Over the next few days, I tried to talk myself into moving out. I looked at other apartments, messaged a couple of listings. But something in me hesitated. Curiosity, stubbornness, maybe a little embarrassment at admitting that I, a 24-year-old adult, was scared of a wall. I also, if I'm being honest, felt something close to obligation. Like I owed it to the woman who used to live there to at least understand what had happened to her, instead of just running the way every tenant before me apparently had. That instinct, looking back, was the second mistake. The first was moving in at all. Before that Thursday, though, there was one more night I need to tell you about, because it's the one that convinced me Mrs. Whitfield hadn't just been telling me an old ghost story to pass the time over coffee. It was maybe 4 days after our conversation. I'd gotten off work early, around 4 in the morning instead of 6, because a pipe had burst somewhere in the call center and they'd sent everyone home. I remember feeling almost giddy about it, the way you do when you get an unexpected chunk of free time, and I decided to stop at an all-night diner a few blocks from the building before heading up, just to sit somewhere bright and normal for a while. I got back to the building a little after 5, while it was still dark out. The lobby was empty, the escalator groaning its way up slow as always, and when the doors opened on the 4th floor, the first thing I noticed was that the hallway light outside 403's door was flickering, on and off, in a rhythm too steady to be a loose bulb. On, off, like someone tapping a switch on purpose. I stood at the escalator for a moment, deciding whether to just go straight to my door without looking down the hall. I decided to look. That was my third mistake, if we're counting. The silhouette was there again, in the same long dark coat, but this time it wasn't facing 403's door. It was facing mine, standing dead center in front of unit 404, close enough that if I'd stepped out of the elevator, I would have been within arm's reach of it. I didn't step out. I stood frozen, half in and half out of the elevator, one hand pressed against the door track to keep it from closing, watching this thing stand in front of my apartment like it was waiting for me to come home. It didn't move. It didn't turn toward me, even though I was almost certain, in the particular way you're certain of something you can't prove, that it knew exactly where I was standing. After maybe 30 seconds, that felt considerably longer, the flickering light outside 403 finally settled, staying off, plunging that end of the hallway into full dark. When it came back on a few seconds later, the hallway was empty. No coat, no silhouette, nothing but the ordinary dust and dim yellow light of an old building at 5 in the morning. I took the stairs down to the lobby instead of going to my door, and I sat in my car in the parking garage until the sun came up, telling myself I'd go up once there was daylight in the hallway, once the building felt like a place people actually lived instead of whatever it had started to feel like. I want to be clear that I didn't sleep well again after that night. Not really. Not the way I had before I moved into that building. I started keeping a small lamp on all night instead of total darkness. I started making sure I never fell asleep facing away from my bedroom door. Small, useless rituals that felt like they mattered at the time. The kind of thing you do when you don't have any real defense against something and need to feel like you're doing anything at all. It was on a Thursday, a week after the conversation with Mistress Whitfield, that everything changed. I was coming back from work around 6:30 in the morning, exhausted, basically sleepwalking through the fourth-floor hallway. And when I got near my door, I saw that 403's door was cracked open. A gap of maybe 4 inches, dark inside, no lights on. I knew with a certainty I can't explain rationally, that I shouldn't go near that door. But the hallway was silent, the whole building still asleep, and some tired, stupid part of me thought, it's just an empty apartment. I'll just take a look, put the question to rest, and go to sleep. I pushed the door open. The sweet, heavy smell I'd been catching through the wall hit me full force inside, almost making me gag. The apartment was thick with dust, furniture covered in yellowed sheets, decades of grime coating everything. The layout was a mirror image of mine, which felt strange in a way I couldn't articulate at the time, like looking at my own home reflected and gone wrong. But there was one thing that didn't add up. On the floor, cutting through the dust, there was a clean path, no dust at all, leading from the door straight to the bedroom in the back. Like someone walked that exact route every single day for years. I followed the path. I shouldn't have, but I did. Into the back bedroom, where I found an old radio sitting on a dresser, turned on, giving off that same low static I heard every night through the wall. Next to the radio was a large mirror leaning against the wall, also coated in dust, covered by a cloth. On the dresser itself, beneath a thin film of dust, I could just make out a few personal items, a hairbrush, a small jewelry box, and a folded piece of paper that looked, from the shape of it, like it might have once been a letter. I stood there for a moment, just looking at the shape of it under the cloth, and I noticed something I hadn't at first. The dust on the floor in front of the mirror was disturbed in a small, tight semicircle, like something had been standing there, shifting its weight from foot to foot, over and over, for a very long time. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I'd already come this far. I don't know why I did what I did next. I pulled the cloth off the mirror. In the glass, reflected, wasn't my own image standing there in that room. It was an image of me lying in my own bed in the apartment next door, on the other side of the wall, asleep, as if the mirror wasn't reflecting that room at all but mine. And as I stood there staring at it, trying to make sense of it, the version of me asleep in the reflection slowly opened its eyes and looked straight at me through the glass. He ran out of that apartment without even remembering to shut the door behind me, without even thinking to grab the letter on the dresser, which I would regret later more than almost anything else that happened that year. I got into mine, locked everything, deadbolt, chain, a chair jammed under the doorknob, everything I could think of, and sat on the floor until the sun actually came up, the light hitting the window hard enough to make anything from that night feel ridiculous and impossible. I didn't sleep that day. I sat by the window with all the lights on, watching the door, waiting for something I couldn't name. Around noon, I finally worked up the nerve to knock on Harold's door downstairs and tell him, in a roundabout way that left out the mirror entirely, that I'd found 403 open and that maybe someone had broken in. He went pale in a way that surprised me, grabbed his keys without a word, and went up to check. He came back down 20 minutes later and told me the door was locked, exactly as it should be, and that I must have imagined it being open. I didn't argue with him. I could tell by the way he wouldn't meet my eyes that he didn't fully believe what he was telling me either. I moved out 3 days later, leaving half my furniture behind, without even saying goodbye to Harold properly. I texted him that I'd gotten a job in another city. He just replied, "Understood." One word, no question mark, like he already expected it. I swore to myself I'd never go back to that building, and for 2.5 years, I kept that promise. I moved to a different city entirely, changed jobs, started seeing someone, tried in every practical way to build a life that had nothing to do with that hallway, or that smell, or that mirror. For a long stretch of time, it actually worked. I stopped waking up at 3 a.m. out of habit. I stopped flinching at old radios. I let myself believe, the way people do, that distance was the same thing as safety. But a month ago, I got a message from an unknown number. It was Harold. He'd gotten my contact through the rental agency, he said, because he needed to settle something with me. According to him, I'd left a personal item behind in the old apartment, something that needed to be removed before some renovations the building was doing. He said the whole 4th floor was finally being gutted and redone, 403 included, and that whatever was left in there needed to be cleaned or it would be thrown out with everything else. I didn't remember leaving anything of value. I asked what it was. He sent a photo. It was a small mirror, about the size of a picture frame, that I'd never seen in my life. It wasn't anything I'd bought or brought into that apartment, and it certainly wasn't a large mirror I remembered from 403's back bedroom. In the reflection in the photo, blurry, barely recognizable, you could just make out the outline of a figure standing behind whoever was taking the picture. A figure in a long dark coat. I stared at that photo for a long time. I told myself it could be Harold's own reflection, distorted by the angle, the poor lighting, the low resolution of an old phone camera. I told myself a lot of things that night. None of them made me feel any better. I didn't respond. I blocked the number. But that night, unable to leave it alone, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I searched the woman's story online, using every detail I could remember from Mrs. Whitfield's account. The building's old address, the approximate decade, the mention of a hotel job downtown. It took hours of scrolling through digitized newspaper archives and half-dead local history forums, but I eventually found a short article, maybe 4 paragraphs long, about a woman found dead in her apartment after neighbors reported an odor in the hallway. No name was given in the version I found, just her age, and the note that the death was not considered suspicious. There was no mention of chains on the door, no mention of footsteps, nothing that matched the fuller version Mrs. Whitfield had told me. Either the newspaper had left those details out on purpose, or the story had grown teeth over 30 years of being passed tenant to tenant, each version a little more specific than the last. I couldn't decide which possibility scared me more. For a few weeks after that, everything was quiet again, and I started to convince myself that blocking Harold had been enough, that whatever thin, fragile thread still connected me to that building had finally been cut. I went back to sleeping normally. I stopped checking my phone for unknown numbers first thing in the morning. But last night, living now in a completely different apartment, in a completely different city, 3 states and 2.5 years away from that hallway, I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of footsteps stopping right outside my door. I lay there for a long time, telling myself it was a neighbor, a coincidence, anything at all except what I already knew it was. And then I heard it, faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere close, closer than it had any right to be. The low static of an old radio, playing through a wall that, as far as I knew, didn't have anything on the other side of it at all. I haven't opened my bedroom door. I haven't turned off the lamp. I'm sitting here with my back against the headboard, laptop balanced on my knees, typing all of this out because it feels like the only useful thing I can do with my hands right now. The only way I know how to keep myself from unlocking that door just to see, the way I saw once before and told myself I never would again. Part of me wants to believe this is nothing. A neighbor. Old pipes settling. The kind of thing any apartment makes at 3 in the morning if you're awake enough to notice. But I know that sound. I've spent 3 years trying to forget the exact rhythm of those footsteps, the particular way they slow down right before they stop, and I would know it anywhere, in any building, in any city. The static hasn't gotten louder. It hasn't gotten quieter either. It's just there, patient, the same way it always was. Like it's been waiting this whole time for me to stop moving long enough for it to catch up. And right now, as I'm writing this, they're still there.